Hello, guys. It's been such a long time since you've seen the Grassroots Living Soil podcast. My gosh, it's been way too long. We're firing up season 2 of the Grassroots Living Soil podcast. I decided to start it out with some of the best people in the cannabis industry. We have Michael Box and Izzy from Sustainable Village. Two amazing people. I don't think Izzy needs a last name just because he's just such an impactful name in the industry. And we have the power of the curls today, guys. Okay. I've just informed about the power of the curls.
Yeah.
These are two curly haired guys that are ready to just break down some amazing information from us for us. So we're going to catch up a little bit here, and we're going to break down what's the latest with Sustainable Village and the Blue Mat system. They've been doing a lot with capillary mats, bottomless pots, and they're the kings of reading moisture in your soil and really getting people to understand that you need to know the moisture level of your soil. If you're going to do living soil, like, got to make sure that we can provide those nutrients to the plant and it can actually treat the soil like a kitchen. So without further ado, I would like Michael and Izzy to say hi and let us know how they're doing. What's up, guys? How you doing?
Hey, Tyler. Yeah, really glad to be here. Izzy Becker, just for the record.
Yeah,
Isidore, as a matter of fact.
I wasn't ready for that one, and I just fired on it anyway. So
Yeah.
We're doing good.
Yeah, we're doing good. It's been it's been an interesting year. And we see you out and about sometimes. I guess the last time we really got to hang out in person was at the Soil Life Summit. In Grass Valley back in February, and that was pretty awesome time.
Yeah, you guys had an amazing presentation. I absolutely loved the combination of you guys two bringing out the info together.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've got a real great team going on here. Besides Izzy, Cooper Didier, he's our kind of R&D and sales design as well. And so, the three of us got to talk a bunch at that presentation, and we did a right afterwards with Peter from the Future Cannabis Project. I think we sat down and did like a real deep dive into some of the newer Blue Mat stuff we were working on, and so that was a great weekend of kind of education and networking and just communicating with other people that are in it. It's actually really pretty inspirational for me. The industry, the market's been so wonky and weird for the last year or two. Lots of good stuff happening, but it's just different. It's not quite as explosive as it had been in the past. So to see so many people that were successful with living soil, doing their thing, and it's good to connect with those people and hear those stories as well. As some of the more discouraging ones we hear from time to time from folks that are having trouble in a really crowded industry.
Yeah, we really got to see the further reaching tentacles of living soil, because at that event, which now we get to see it in fruition, is we had Matt Barnes from Easy Organics, and he got his big setup going on out there with Grassroots Living Soil beds and like miles of drip tape going on. I looked down that big giant long bed, and I'm just like, wow, look at all that drip tape from Sustainable Village. So it's great to meet those people in person and then see their projects come to fruition in amazing places like Australia, Bisbee in Australia. And then we had the European guys there, obviously, Eco Thrive.
Matt Barnes, all those guys, they're all friends of ours, and kind of Matt, we just designed quite a few. I mean, it's like 3 or 4 now.
Yeah, and I have to do another one tomorrow.
Another one right now.
Yeah.
For Matt with Easy as Organics, I think that's his.
Easy as Organics.
Yeah. And he's a great guy too. What a neat dude. We enjoyed meeting him, and there was folks from all over the world there. So
it's great to see living soil exploding other places around the world, like it did for California in the last, prior to the last 2 years, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for bringing up the Soil Summit, guys. It's been a little bit too long, and we would love to do another one in the future. We wanted to do one around the time of the MJ BizCon but it just not didn't work out, and there's too much work to be done to make that happen. But Steve Cantwell's offered up his place out there in Nevada, his farm, for us to host the event at. So if we could find a good time to do that, it would make things a lot more friendly to the budget. And I bet you everybody would love to see Steve's farm in person. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I imagine so.
yeah. So let's tear into it, guys. What's the latest with Sustainable Village? What's the latest innovations you guys have going on over there? I know you were talking about moisture meters and some other interesting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I was just thinking about, thinking about what are we going to talk about today? And I got a handful of things, and I'm really excited to have Izzy sitting in here too to fill in some of the like nitty gritty details on a few pieces. But one thing I was thinking about a lot um, is just all the design work that's been happening here. So we have I don't know if folks know this, but when people come to us for blue mat systems, we do free design work. So we'll design a complete irrigation system for no cost with like really nice schematics and itemized price lists and everything. And that's like a free service we do. You can just go on the website and request the one of those designs. But I was just kind of looking through a lot of them that you guys have been doing lately, and been super impressed with the kind of quality of the schematics that are coming out, and how easy they are to use and put together. And and the way we're doing them these days. This design is always a constant evolution, especially with the technology that we work with. Mostly using tensiometers to control irrigation events and hit really targeted moisture levels. Sometimes with the blue mat, sometimes with other tensiometer based controls. And we are just that's an evolution. It's right on the kind of forefront of what is available out there, and we're basically constantly researching new products that might be out there from other countries. And we actually just got off the phone with a manufacturer in Israel just now that has some really cool controllers that interface with some other moisture sensors that are manufactured in Australia. So we have these, we're kind of looking all over the place for lesser known products that work well, and how do we integrate them into irrigation systems to hit, to accomplish our goals. And so to that point, like some of the cool stuff we've been doing is hitting extremely targeted moisture levels in soil using adjustable pressure reducers, and in conjunction with blue mats.
Yeah. Do you want me to throw in?
Yeah, go ahead. Take a shot.
So basically, we've found through a lot of R&D, the three main things to control a blue mat system is what is the setting on the blue mat, where's the placement of that blue mat, and really this could be extrapolated to pretty much any sensory-based system, but what's the setting, where is it placed, and with blue mats, it's what's the pressure that is behind it. So because the blue mat's like a physical, it's like a gate. If you've got a diaphragm that's going like this, that's what's controlling the water flow. If the pressure is higher, the water will be able to push its way through faster. And if it's lower, then it's slower. So you can adjust the setting on a blue mat without actually having to touch the blue mat. So one thing we've been able to do that I think has helped things become really scalable in a way that they haven't been until now, just is that in the past, you might have to change the setting on every single blue mat if you'd like to change the setting on them. And now you can just change the pressure reducer that's hooked up to the system, and you can push it up or you can push it down. And so you can affect the moisture content of your soil throughout your entire facility by just changing a dial. And it's kind of ironic that the pressure reducers have a dial on them, which is almost like a blue mat dial. It's just one dial as opposed to the rest. And you have a pressure gauge. You could do things like set a blue mat at 10 psi, and then you could push the pressure up to 15 psi and push it to be wetter. And you could push it down to 5 psi and make it drier. And you could do multiple pressure reducers, and you can have solenoid valves that are in front of each one, and you can alternate between, so that way you're not having to constantly move a dial. but you can set up like a raise, and you can throughout the day or throughout the cycle affect the moisture content of what's going without having to actually touch the blumets.
Right. And all of that really, becomes super effective in a few different growing styles, right? So certainly there's some application when you're growing in larger like containers, like raised beds or really large pots. But for those, when we're not manipulating the moisture content as much, we're seeing it more in like smaller container grows. Like some people, like, I know we're talking about living soil today, but in the cocoa world of smaller pots that are using cocoa and even in synthetic fertilizer mixes, we can run that all through the blumets, and we can basically begin to kind of steer the growth of the plants by doing really targeted drybacks and moisture levels. We can do the same thing in when people are using like smaller containers, but still living soil, which is something we're seeing a lot as like a new trend is, 5 and 10 gallon pots out there with some sort of like living soil, some, basically some like heavily amended potting mix, soil mix that's being called living soil, and we'll do some drybacks on that if we want to manipulate it. In the raised beds, mostly it's about drybacks during transition for canopy control. So we're not getting quite as explosive growth of the canopy at the beginning of flower.
Yeah. One other interesting thing that we can do to manipulate the moisture as well that we've been looking into is controlling the depth of the sensor. So this is a little bit of a granular thing, but because of gravity, water is not distributed evenly throughout soil. So basically, if you have a pot and your pot's like this tall, the further down into you get, the wetter it is. And it's not just because it's drying out from the top. Gravity is actually pulling the water down. And essentially, double check, but it's 1 centimeter of height is 1 millibar of difference. So if you're on a bed and you're reading at the very top of that bed, the moisture content's not going to be exactly the same at the bottom of the bed. And so you can either kind of try and get an average of the whole thing, or one thing that's been really interesting is if you get the deeper you get a sensor into the pot or bed, the longer of a dryback you can enact in between watering events. Because since it's wetter down here than up here, it's going to force all of this to dry down before it gets to here and then waters. So by doing we can now sort of either maintain a very static moisture content if we want, or we can, by choosing the depth of the sensor and how deep it is in the pot, we can control drybacks and how wide they are.
And I know we're just talking this whole time, so if you got questions, just fire away here, Tyler.
You guys are killing it.
But I think we should really define what we're talking about when we're talking about drybacks too. So, I think a lot of people, maybe some people might think a dryback means when you start to notice like a plant being affected by taking all the moisture out of the soil, stressing them out. There's that kind of
I don't think you want to take it that far, but
I don't know if I want to call it
people,
whole lifestyle, but there's some thoughts stressing plants out in that way is healthy for them. That's not the kind of drybacks we're talking about. We're not taking them past like a permanent wilt point where we're actually damaging the plant. What we're doing is we're cycling moisture levels within a graph called a moisture release curve. And that is, it's a concept that I think, more cannabis growers are starting to become familiar with, but it's, as you're designing irrigation systems, as we're looking at optimal ways to irrigate plants, understanding what a moisture release curve or is something that's very important, and
something I've never heard of before in detail. I mean, so is this something
you've probably got the best handle on these?
So it's something we used to work around with a lot back in the lab, and things we see So as here,
Oh,
just
for those that don't know, we before Izzy came to work over here at Sustainable Village, he was at the CU Boulder Soil Science Lab, and we
yeah,
kind of poached him from
yeah.
the
Specifically
university.
soil
Yeah.
soil microbiology
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
But yeah, so a big thing that we look at, and I think this answers like a lot of questions about like why a tensiometer is different than some of those prong sensors you see, and like why do these give a percentage and this gives like a tension reading? What does that actually mean? So essentially, there's two important things in soil relating to water, or three, and that is the amount of water, that's the percentage, and the availability of the water, that's the tension. So water likes to stick to things because it's polar, so it will stick to the soil. And depending on the texture of the soil, it will stick more or it will stick less. And then the plant has to unstick it. So basically, the tension that you're actually reading with like a tensiometer is basically telling you how much work the plant is having to do to get the water out of the soil. So it doesn't really matter how much water there is from the perspective of what the plant's getting. It matters on how easily it can get it, because who cares if there's a bunch of water if the plant can get to any of it.
I want the plant to get easy
yeah.
water whenever it wants it. Treat this
Exactly.
like a kitchen, or go drink a glass of water at 2 o'clock in the morning if you want to.
Totally. And it means like your plant can have water available to it, but it might have to work harder to get to it. So you can totally exist in a place where your plant is like fine and it's looking okay and everything's just fine, but it's growing slower because it's having to exert a lot of energy into getting things to itself. And how it's controlling that is by opening up the stomata on its leaves, and like there's just a whole process involved in getting it out. But the volume of water, the amount of water, it tells you how much air there is, which is also very important, because if there's this much water, there can only be this much, out of 100%, if 80% is water, there's only 20% for the soil and the air. And things like pH. Yeah, pH, and then also EC, which is the nutrient strength. And EC is very important it's electrical conductivity, but it's just very important for living soil and for hydroponics, because it's just a measure of how much nutrients there are. Whether or not you're giving the nutrients or the microbes are giving those nutrients, there's a certain amount of nutrients that are available, and we'd like to ideally, it's crazy with soil because it's just all over the place and the microbes really are handling it for you. But so what that means is, the more your soil dries out, the more the nutrient strength goes up, because there's less water and the same amount of nutrients. It's like if I poured some nutrients in this cup and then evaporated half of it, the amount of nutrients is the same, but now it's twice as concentrated. So a moisture release curve, also called a moisture retention curve, is basically you've got a graph, and on that graph, on the Y, you have the percentage, the volume of water, they call it volumetric water content, and on the X, you've got tension. And so basically you just start measuring and you go, at this percentage of water, this is the tension. At this percentage of water, this is the tension. At this percentage of water, this, and it draws a curve.
Now, just jump it in.
Yep.
What we see is, when we see this curve, the different soil types are going to have different shaped curves. Okay. So that means that the relationship between volumetric water content and soil moisture tension is different, and this is, I hope this is fairly obvious to me, but it's going to be different from soil type to soil type. So there's a lot of stock ones out there. If you start going and Googling this, there's some cool YouTube videos that explain all this as well. But what a peat-based living soil mix might be is going to be different than what a pure cocoa soil mix is going to be, versus what rock wool is going to be, versus what like a native soil, like a clay based or a sand or silty based.
I can see them being widely different.
Oh yeah,
more like getting to know your soil's moisture curve is what this is about in my mind.
Yeah, it's like a thumbprint for your soil and water, and the idea is just balance. It's just like making a grow room where you're balancing humidity and light and temperature and airflow, and it doesn't, one can't be too strong compared to the other. It's the same exact thing in soil, where you want to balance how much water, how available is the water, and how much air, and then all the factors that get influenced by that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's just like we would, like you said, in the soil, we're going to balance everything. If there's too much of one thing, there's not enough of another, and we have back and forth. That's beautiful. I've never haven't I didn't know these different points of reading soil and moisture, and also I haven't had anybody explain to me the difficulty of a plant sourcing out water. I never thought about that as being a measurable stat.
Yeah.
So let's go into this a little bit further. What does this look like? Like, show me. Show me.
Yeah. I mean,
Draw it on a
yeah,
piece of
no,
paper.
you
I
wanna
could draw it
see-
on. I could.
Are we,
So
are we going visual here or
Well,
audio?
no, I'm saying like,
Yeah.
how are we doing this physically? Or is this
So-
like a
So some of the things we're looking at, I mean, and then I'll let you fill the gaps here, but basically it's gonna look like a curve, like it's gonna be a drop, like a slope, okay? And at the top, it's gonna be flat, and then at some point it's gonna fall off and it's gonna head down, like a steeper slope, and then it's gonna flatten off at the bottom. And those two transition points are the important parts on the graph that we're really, really focused on. And the top is like basically like saturation, like a
Yeah.
fully like saturated water, right?
past field capacity.
Yeah, past field
drops
capacity.
off to dryness? I'm guessing.
And then the bottom curve where it flattens out, that's your permanent wilt point. So when we're irrigating, what we're trying to do is we need to keep it in between those 2 points at all times, right? We need to keep it in between. We need to keep it lower than field capacity, just a little bit lower than field capacity, and we need to keep it wetter than permanent wilt point. And so, in order to do that, and different soils are more forgiving, right? So like living soil actually has a lot more, you have a lot more kind of space to work with. Cocoa has more space to work with than rock wool does, for instance. That's a real steep cliff.
Yeah.
What's cool about it is you can really, as Izzy was mentioning, as the volumetric water content drops in soil, the density of nutrients increases, right? Because it's more concentrated.
Yeah.
So the idea is to bring that moisture level down closer to the permanent wilt point without hitting it, and therefore concentrating nutrients so that more nutrients are able to be taken up by the plant. And then, but still hitting an irrigation event before we get to that permanent wilt point. So how do we do that? I mean, is that about right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Right.
And so how do we do that is we need to know, because again, we have X, Y axis is here. And one of the bottom axis, that's measured in tension, right? So that's usually in millibars or centibars, which are, what the BlueMat digital moisture meter, that's in millibars, that's measuring in the aerometer products. Those are all measuring in centibars. Anything that's a tensiometer is going to measure soil moisture tension. So using tensiometers to control irrigation events or influence our manual irrigation events is very important in keeping the soil moisture content in between these two data sets or two data points that we are focusing on. So taking your soil moisture, and you could go, like a lot of bigger name brand soils might publish their own moisture retention curve or moisture release curve. You can also go and there's a process to determine what your own is as well. We could tell you what that is if that's of interest too.
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of what I was getting to next. Is obviously I'm going to need.
So let's start there. I mean, if we're
Yeah.
really trying to get super precise about the best moisture levels for your soil that you've got at home in your raised beds out on the farm there, Tyler, like this is the process you would go through.
Yeah. So basically measuring volume of water is pretty easy because you can do it by weight. So you can do it with a sensor, like a volumetric water content sensor, but that's not how we would do it when we were doing things, simply because weight doesn't lie. And just so beautifully in the metric system, 1 gram of water is 1 milliliter. So what you would do is basically take your soil, make it super dry, take like a 5-gallon pot's worth of it, or a 5-gallon bucket, let's say. So if it's in your raised bed, just take some out and put it in a 5-gallon pot, fill it up. and you would weigh it so you know the weight of what it looks like when it's totally dry. And then you would water it until it completely holds the absolute most amount of water it could hold. So you're seeing tons of runoff, it's draining out. And then once it's done draining, you weigh it. And the amount of grams it's increased in weight will tell you how much water there is. And then you just divide the two. So let's say it was like 1,000 grams of soil, and then you make it hold, and you water it until it won't hold anything more, and then let it drain out. And then you added 500 grams of water, that's 30% water content, 33% of like what it's going to hold in total. And then you just stick the thing on a scale and stick a tensiometer in it. And then as it dries out, you just measure the weight, and then do that same equation, which tells you what the volume is. And weight doesn't lie. So you don't have to worry about like, is my sensor working, or can I trust these numbers? It's just as simple as like, that's how much water there is. And then the thing is like with volumetric water content, you can use weight or a sensor, but for tensiometers, you have to have a tensiometer. There's no alternative to it. So you stick a tensiometer in there, and then you just record 2 data points, and then you just like make your graph, and then you just go, oh, it's at 55%. What's the tension? Oh, it's at 30%. What's the tension? Oh, it's at 20%. What's the tension? And you're going to see the curve form. And then once you do that, you know it.
So yeah, so basically you're gonna plot a bunch of points on a graph over time as the soil dries down using a tensiometer and the data from your scale, right? Because your scale is how you're gonna be measuring how much physical water is in your soil solution. And then when you put all those points together, if you take enough of them, yes, it's gonna draw that same curve. It's gonna be a flat top, and then there's gonna be it's gonna fall off the top, and then at some point it's gonna level out again. So then you'll be when you find that transition point where it levels out at the bottom of the graph, you're gonna know that's your permanent wilt point. And then you're gonna have a data point. You're gonna say, oh, that happens at 180 millibars, or that happens at 300 millibars, or whatever it's gonna be. And so that's how you would do it for that's the process for doing it for a customized soil mix, like you probably have at home.
Yeah.
Most people that have like, started with something they bought, maybe they who knows who they bought it from, but then they've added compost, and they've added this and that, and they moved some from here, or they, like had to relocate, and then they were dumping it in wheelbarrows, and so who knows, but they, everybody's got their soil mixes they're using, and it's going to be particular.
I think I'm going to go take my 4x8 bed and put it on our pallet scale out in the back and conduct on a 4x4 bed.
Yeah, but the beauty is if there's consistency in your soil, and this is one thing for commercial design on our end, but why we really like people having like a consistent soil mix throughout the whole bed, and also between their beds, is that if you want to use sensors to monitor, and even more so to control things, you want to know that those numbers that you're gaining are the same for everything, because otherwise it's like, oh, well, I did it for this bed, but this bed is a totally different soil mix, so it's also slightly different, and I want to stress, like, you don't have to be perfect. It's not like if you don't have these numbers like perfectly exact, but you do want to know the general points that are going to tell you like, this is where the plant is getting stressed. Because one of the big things is you don't want to actually get to anywhere really near permanent wilting point. There's a thing called available water content, and that's the difference between runoff, field capacity, and permanent wilting point. And then there's a thing they call maximum allowed depletion, and that's just 50% of the way between those two. And that is basically because it's like a sliding scale. As it gets drier and drier, the plant's having more and more difficulty getting water, and it's going to experience more and more water stress. So by the time your plant's actually wilting, it's going to be super stressed out. So we don't want to actually get there. But we need to know, like, that's the point of, if you pass that point, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, that's permanent damage.
Yeah,
to the plant. And so you've permanent, for that growth cycle, that plant is not going to produce its full yield.
definitely.
Now, another interesting part when you start getting down towards the bottom of that that curve is we're talking about nutrient levels increasing, right? So that means your EC is increasing. And as that EC increases, as the soil gets drier, EC increases because the nutrient profile within the soil solution is becoming more dense. And we can also see issues getting down to that point with like too much nutrients. So like higher than wanted nutrient availability.
Absolutely. Well, it can just
Yeah.
make the pH fluctuate like
Mhm.
crazy. So all of a sudden there's lockout of too many types of nutrients, because it's not, yeah, it's just a bad idea to make the plant have too high of an EC, because it can really stress the plant out. And there's a number of different things that can happen. It can really
Yeah.
mess stuff up.
So again, thinking about soil as a liquid solution, which it is, right? It's all kinds of stuff mixed together. It's the organic materials, it's inert materials, it's minerals, and it's water. And basically, if you think about the whole soil body as a liquid solution, um, as the water is pulled out of it, like those nutrients become denser and denser in concentration. So yeah, so again, as the drier, the more dry a soil gets, the higher the EC becomes.
Definitely.
That's another kind of good takeaway.
And having a really good soil with like a high ability to hold on to nutrients can be really good, because that EC is really just measuring what's dissolved in the water in the soil. Your soil could have much more nutrients than that. So having like a cation exchange capacity, which is like the ability of the soil to sort of like hold those nutrients for the plant to come get later, can be like really good, because the more that's like in that, they call it soil solution or soil water. That's what the plant can't. It's sort of like the plant has to take that up in certain forms as it's taking up water.
Can we go back to one thing that I found was very interesting that you guys said was the measurement and data point of how difficult is it, or how much energy is the plant exerting mining this water out from the soil and absorbing it and using it? Can you guys talk a little bit about what techniques and what tools are used to get that, to see what that measurement is and to understand that a little bit better? Because I feel like that's something that would affect my personal situation, is like, how can I measure, or look at my water moisture level as as a easy to use thing for my plant, or is it hard to get, or how do I know that?
That's just tensiometers. That's like how you
Yeah.
measure it.
Yeah. So again, that just the short answer is you keep it in that like upper 2/3 of your moisture retention curve, basically. Like and you're doing that by using a tensiometers to make sure you don't drop below a certain moisture level or above a certain moisture level. If you want the like reason that's happening, like
It's basically there's chemical and physical reasons, but it's basically decided by pore size. So water likes to stick to things, and the smaller the pores are, the more surface area there is, because there's like many very small pores. The more surface area there is for the water to stick to. So the finer textured the soil, the more fine of a texture it has, the more the water's going to want to stick to it. That's why clay soils, water really likes to stick to it, where you can have a lot of water in that soil and very little of it is actually available to the plant, because it reaches this point where the plant just like can't pull it out. I mean, the vacuums that you will see form in soil are mind-bogglingly large if you know pressure. I mean, we're talking like 50 psi that the
Just
plant
did
has
like
to.
a lot of stuff in my mind come together. Like in cultivation, you have those moments of like confusion, and then you have those vast moments of clarity. And for me, like, you just helped me through one of those moments of clarity and confusion, because I relate it to my own life of man, that's that one time I went way over crazy thinking worm castings were the best thing in the world, and I put like way too much into a fabric pot. It was insane. But that soil, it retained so much water, it was amazing. But once it dried out, oh my gosh, it was so difficult to get it wet again, and there was just giant vacuum going on in the soil, like you're explaining. So man, that made a lot of sense. You can go overboard with certain things and see some very extremes. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you want to just figure out, it's like I said, it's all about balance, in terms of like, you could have a point where your tension is really good, like the plant is getting tons of water, but it's way too dry in the soil, and so the EC is super high, and so the plant's getting nutrient stressed. So you want to find something that balances air, water, and nutrient, because that's like the factors that the plant is really caring about. You can't have any one of those things be too off, or else the plant will be unhappy, regardless of if the other two are fine.
In my soil moisture meter that I got from you guys, that's the carrot with the meter at the top. That's a tensiometer, right?
Yeah, so it's
That's like one of these.
yeah, one of these, but with a little
Little
head
head on
screwed up
top.
top. Yeah, I don't
Yeah, I got the little white cap to
Yeah.
cover it from the sun too.
Yeah, exactly. So that will have like that's these, they look like they're these, plastic tubes with a ceramic tip, and then on top it screws on this digital meter head. And basically that just has a little button on it, has one button, you hit the button, and it's going to give you a digital readout when you hit that button. And that's going to be a measurement of millibars.
Is it still at 100 millibars you guys want to be at? Is that still your guys' optimum target range?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going from
Well,
yeah,
it depends on
knowledge.
your.
It depends on your soil type, right?
Yeah.
Depends on your soil type.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we're,
Like cocoa, you would want to be at like 40 or 30, which would be very wet for certain soils. And yeah, I mean, we've been finding that you can run things much wetter than people have previously thought around living soil. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Set up too, your soil mass. Do you have air under it where it's drying from the bottom as well? Like there's so many different factors going on there too.
Yeah. Well, that's why we like grassroots pots, is because
Yeah,
we don't want things drying out unpredictably.
yeah.
We want things drying out predictably. So
No, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
we we love your product and everything, but it really is unique and special. Like the living soil liner piece is a total game changer for fabric pots. I mean, we talk about it with a lot of our customers use grassroots beds, and yeah, that is
Well,
you
I
get that
think there's
you
also
get the ease of a fabric pot with the moisture retention on the sides of
like a plastic pot. Yeah.
container. Yeah.
Because we
well, there's
don't want things
certain
drying.
people out there that alter that and do other things, and I think cause them issues. Like I'm dealing with a customer where he set up the bottom of his grassroots raised bed. The bottom like 12 inches of it are like a hugelkultur wood setup, and it's a massive dry out happening also from the bottom up. So it's like he's it just kind of like been a nightmare, and he's came to the fact of he's going to tear the bed apart, and I'm just going to go with 100% soil, because there was just so many other factors happening there, and he was thinking this wood was going to degrade in like 6 months or something like that and turn into soil, and it's like he's still got full giant logs under there that aren't degrading at all. So it's like,
Yeah,
you
fabric raised bed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty ambitious.
10 years.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, hugelkultur is a cool idea. Like we're both like permaculture.
yeah, my whole front yard
enthusiasts
is
and stuff.
culture beds.
But but it's for it's designed to be outdoors and buried and like for
in a big soil mass.
groundwater and store groundwater and drier conditions and things like that. I mean, a fabric raised bed. We pretty much only recommend folks, and people do whatever they want. Please and do whatever you want. Out in the weed growing world, everybody's got an opinion, and but the soil, like I recommend, if you're gonna get a grassroots bed, you fill it with soil. You fill it with just the top to bottom consistent moisture, because that from an irrigation point of view, we want that consistency because we're going to be able to interact with it and manipulate it much easier if it's consistent and has just has like a high level of capillary action from top to bottom.
Dealing with a cannabis clone that needs 14 to 16 inches of nice, beautiful soil to stretch out its roots in. So it's, we have other people that are doing layers of sand and rock and all kinds of stuff. And it's just like, I caution against that stuff and say, hey, for us, I recommend putting, if you're going to do a drain tray on the ground and then put like a 1-inch layer of pumice rock in the bottom of the drain tray, then throw your bed on top of that and put nothing but soil inside the bed. So then if you overwater, we know the water is leaving the bed and it's not like sitting in a pit of water.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your guys' explanation of how you think of that, because that's actually what I truly recommend to our customers if they're going down that route.
I mean, look, again, there's lots of different ways to do this and structure it, and like we don't really have anything bad to say about anybody. That's kind of like us. But We have seen more success than others in how, like, I mean, I guess part of your question is like when you get a grassroots fabric bed and you fill it with soil, like what should you put underneath it? I mean, is that kind of what?
Well,
I
I
think
think
that's a big thing. I think that's something that customers are struggling with constantly is, do I throw it right on the ground? Is that okay? You know, do I have to put it in a tray? Do I have to do this? Yeah, if you're on the second story in a building, maybe we need to worry about water retention. But if, you know, so I think there's a lot of different ways to skin
Yeah,
a
I mean, I think we don't. I mean, one of the main things we don't want a lot of airflow going through the bottom of the bed, right? Like having some available oxygen is not such a bad thing. Um, and having the ability for it to drain, you don't want it sitting in a sealed tray, right? So that if it ever does overwater, then it's going to fill up with water and be, sitting in a swimming pool. We don't want to see that. We always want the ability, and let's be real, like you're growing any kind of plant in any kind of container, like you have to have an ability for runoff to occur, or else you're just setting yourself up for disaster. So we never want to see a bed sitting directly in a tray with no ability for runoff. Um,
yeah,
I mean, what's your personal opinion, Izzy? What do you think?
I think one of the biggest things that people don't realize about the whole like layering thing is it's just a thing called perch water table, which I'm sure a lot of people might know about. But basically, if you have media, because it's getting wetter and wetter and wetter, at the bottom of every bit of like media, so let's say you have a pot, and at the bottom of that pot, there's going to be a moment where gravity exerts the same amount of force as wicking or capillary action is wicking it up. So it's getting pulled down and up at the same amount. So it just sits there. And so there's this thing at the bottom of every single container called a perch water table, which is basically a zone where it's just super wet. And so if you in your bed put a bunch of like gravel at the bottom of your bed to increase aeration, it's not actually increasing aeration at all. All it's doing is moving that perch water table upwards. And the thing is that perch water table is a moment where it stays really wet there and roots don't really want to grow in it because it's super wet. So I advise against putting aeration layers at the bottom of your bed for the purpose of like increasing airflow, because it actually doesn't do that. It's just taking away rooting space for the plants.
Seems like it makes the whole situation more difficult in my
Yeah, and then on the horizontal layer thing, all I got to say is like its benefits and drawbacks, and everything has a benefit or a drawback, and I think you just have to decide if that is worth it to you. So one thing is like if you have like 7 layers of different soil in your bed, and we stick a sensor in there, if it hits a different layer, that number is going to mean a different thing. So I'm not going to be able to tell you what number you're looking for, because every one of those layers is going to have its own little perch water table and its own little, its own little thing. And so it just makes using sensors really difficult, and it makes like understanding what's going on more difficult. But that being said, if you feel that the benefit gained by those layerings overrides the ability to sense things, so it's like I'm not telling people what to do. I just always say that there's benefits and drawbacks to everything. And since we're the sensor people and we're trying to tell people how to monitor soil, it's like we'd like to see a consistent soil if you want to be able to know what readings you're getting and make decisions based off those things, if that makes sense.
No, that's a perfect explanation. And everybody wants consistency. And I think that's what you're looking for, whether it's consistent harvests and consistent product in the end. And it all starts with consistent soil, consistent moisture, consistent feeding of the right nutrients at the right time, or having it. And it all flows along. It's like conversation we're having about water. It's the same conversation you'd have with a soil technician, and then balancing your soil and getting it in the right areas. So it's like, I'm glad we get to take such a deep dive in how that affects, how water affects that situation, because water is your biggest nutrient. I think everybody just doesn't take that in mind, so very, very cool. I have a question floating in the back of my mind. Me going off of my old data that I know about sustainable village and blue mats. Do you guys have, like, in a 30-gallon pot, let's say we're running a 30-gallon living soil grassroots pot, and you have, I saw you guys did a thing on social media where we have the drip tape around there and you have one moisture sensor. Is it still good to have a deep sensor and a shallow sensor? or is there a size container where we should switch over to having a deep sensor and a shallow container? Just kind of going back to what you guys suggest in different situations.
Depends on what you want.
Yeah, well, it does. Depends on what you want.
If you want
there's different, you can, I mean, that's true. Look, we're going for simplicity these days. We want like a high level of functionality. We want a certain kind of functional ease of use, right? So in general, I think it makes most sense to use 1 carat per pot, especially in a 30-gallon container. And I wonder if I have one here. We have these. So this here, I mean, I don't think people are going to see this. I don't know if we're going to go on visual with this or if it's an audio thing. But what this is, it's a new device that we've gotten from Italy. And it's basically it's an emission device, so we can cook this up to the end of a blue mat. This is a 10-inch drip ring, and we can hook this directly into the end of a blue mat. So we can, for a 30-gallon pot these days, this is probably different than we've recommended in the past, and I acknowledge that, but we're kind of going through a constant evolution of design and finding new products, and I think that's what's called for, honestly, is to be continuously looking for what's better and not just,
constantly improving.
Constant improvement, which means that we're changing our mind sometimes. And again, I acknowledge that. But this drip ring, a 10-inch drip ring on a 30-gallon pot, is about the simplest and easiest way to water a 30-gallon pot. So we see a lot of facilities that have many 30 gallons pot, right? Maybe you have 100, 200, 1,000, something like that.
Very popular for moms.
Yeah, particularly for moms. That seems to be 30 gallons for moms is really common, actually. So one 10-inch sensor, 9-inch sensor, the Maxi, and a 10-inch drip ring. It's economical, for one thing. We're going for economics these days too. We do, and we're cap dialing, which is another process we haven't even gotten into today. It's basically a way to dial 1, 10, 100, 1,000 carats all at the same time.
We have to talk about that.
And get them and have them all basically hit the exact moisture level, so that we can get super consistent moisture level from pot to pot to pot to pot. So if we have 1, 10, 1,000, whatever it is, containers in the room, they're all hitting the same moisture level. And that's how that adjustable pressure reducer works, by the way. So if we have a method for dialing dialing all of our carats to the exact same moisture level now, very consistently. And so then we know that every pot in that room is at 80 millibars, so that when we drop the pressure, it jumps up to 120 millibars or whatever that is. That's how that adjustable pressure reducer tech kind of works with it. But yeah, one 9-inch maxi carat and one of these 10-inch drip rings for a 30-gallon pot. I would go anywhere from probably a 10-gallon to a 30-gallon pot with these 10-inch drip rings. I've got a 5-inch ring that goes great with the 5-gallon and below pot. We get into bigger containers. Go ahead.
I was going to say, how does it work with emitting water out of the bottom? I see where
it's basically there's a piece of drip tube. There's a 1/4-inch drip tube that's mounted on the inside with emitters every 4 inches.
Every 4 inches. Okay.
And the thing is, like, this particular model of tubing that we got from this one manufacturer works really good. And we have not had that experience with other brands or manufacturers. So this is the one that we're going with. It's our plant.
We've been looking for a long time.
Yeah, we've been looking for a long time. This is the one that works. It's new to the market. So it'll be on our website. So like there's a 10-inch plant ring and there's the 5-inch plant ring or drip ring. I think we're calling them exactly, but something like that. And but they're just going. We've put a couple thousand of them out so far. We've got facilities running them. There's a whole bunch up in Montana. We've got some guys here local in Boulder, some big ones in New Mexico that are doing this with this drip ring, and they're working spectacularly. So I really think that's the future, is for anything that's in that like small, like 30 gallons and down, that are doing multiples, like one 9-inch carat and one of these drip rings. I mean, we're talking like $15 a pot or something like that for individual per pot moisture control sensing,
Which is pretty low.
It's pretty low because
Yeah.
there's no controller on the back end, right? So you might be able to buy a drip emitter for cheaper. You would definitely be able to buy a drip emitter for cheaper, but you'd have to have a whole control system to get anywhere close to what we're doing, and that's going to be tens of thousands of dollars. I mean,
If not more,
if
more.
not
You
hundreds.
see people,
Yeah,
spending
Well,
ridiculous
that,
amount of
what
money.
it takes to run those systems correctly too is a whole nother.
and
Yeah,
and you're
it's
not even
crazy.
and they're not even going to get them right because they're just like when you do that, you have like one moisture meter per 100 pots or something like that, or even more pots. So you're not getting that kind of like individual microclimate monitoring that you're getting. So every single plant is getting consistent watering.
Yeah.
Per plant. So
I think one of the big things with the drip rings and stuff that I like has become our big focus, definitely mine, and I would say most other people at the company as well. Is like it's all about consistency, particularly at commercial scale, but definitely all the way down to a small scale as well. It's like consistency of those three things we talked about with blue mats: consistency of how you're setting them, consistency of the pressure behind them, and consistency of where they're getting placed and where the water is coming out. So even though you could do like a ring of blue soak and it will work just as well, the fact that you got to cut it and connect it and do all these things and that you at each step you need to make sure that it's the same. So having something that's like plug and play, that they're all going to be the same, and these drip rings have this kind of convenient little gap in them
To fit around the stock.
here. Yeah, so you just put your carrot right there, and then so then that allows you to know that everything's like the same. I just had a conversation with a commercial client this morning was about this, where they're like, oh, we're just getting some different readings bed to bed. And I was like, oh, did you preset them? Do the cap dialing? They're like, yeah, we did. And then I was like, well, do you have consistency in where your blue mats are being placed? And they're like, no. Because the thing is, a tensiometer is it's a physical thing that's happening. The water has to actually get over to it. And so if it's 3 inches away from where water's coming out versus if it's 6 inches away from where water's coming out, it's going to take longer for that water to get there, and everything's going to get wetter by the time it does. So where you're placing your sensor, and I like saying sensor because really this is the same for any sensory system you're going to do, not just blue mats, but definitely with blue mats. Where you place it is just as important as what it's set to, if that makes sense. That they're both like equally important in what's like ending up happening. So for me in a commercial system, if you want to do something that's simple and it works and it's easy and it's not a headache, it's just everything should be like as consistent as possible. So on the other side, you can expect everything to behave the exact same way and make decisions that you know will affect the whole grow. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So how are you guys dialing in anywhere from 1 to 100 carats to be all the same?
right. So when we're going to take a jump and say, and we really haven't even like looked at a blue mat or even talked about exactly how they looked. I think we're kind of making a bit of an assumption that the people listening to this know kind of how they function. But to give a quick overview of that, is the blue mat itself it's a ceramic, it's a device, right? It's a moisture sensing valve. It's a tensiometer that controls a valve. And the way it looks is there's a ceramic tip, there's a plastic column that's either 2 or 5 inches long, and then on top of that there's a screw cap, and that screw cap is basically the valve device. The whole column is filled with water, and it's inserted into the soil. Now that cap that's screwed on tight is underneath of it. Yeah, underneath of it, like on the inside of it has a rubber diaphragm. And this rubber diaphragm is physically connected to a pinch valve. And when the and that pinch valve is pinching a piece of thin 3 millimeter tubing that goes through the top of the cap. So your cap that's screwed onto the top of this column, it's a green cap with a brown dial, and a piece of 3 millimeter silicon tubing that goes through the top of it. Goes in, and that's being pinched by this valve. And that valve is connected to this rubber diaphragm. As the soil dries out, that the pressure inside the comb becomes negative. So the soil dries out, the ceramic tip dries out, a negative pressure is created. And that negative pressure pulls on the diaphragm itself to open a water flow. So that's like the basic functionality of a blue mat is the soil dries out, pressure changes inside of it. That pressure is exerted on a rubber diaphragm, which opens a pinch valve that allows water to flow through a thin piece of tubing, irrigating your pot, container, bed, whatever, until the soil reaches the moisture level that you have it set at and neutralizes the pressure inside of the cone, and it turns itself off. So really it's in a, I'll let you get into this in a second, but the that rubber diaphragm is operates by having tension exerted upon it, right? So when the soil's drying out, tensions being the rubber diaphragm has tension being exerted on it because it's existing in an environment of negative pressure. So what we've found is if when we do the dial-in process on the carrot with the bottom of the carrot removed, so that that diaphragm is just completely open to atmosphere.
Okay.
We're able to get consistency. So, I mean, do you want to explain the technique?
Yeah. Well, I just think I've developed some good analogies to explain this in slightly more like layman's terms, I think. So basically, a really good example of what's going on is the thing's full of water, and when the soil dries out, water gets sucked out through that ceramic cone. No air can get in to replace it, so it makes a vacuum. Vacuum and negative pressure that's the same. We're talking about the same thing. So analogy I really like is when you're chugging from a water bottle really fast and water's going into your mouth, but no air is getting into the water bottle, the sides start to crumple in. Yeah. And then later when air gets it, you can push it back out. Same exact concept. So it's sealed, and as water comes out, the diaphragm that's on top of it, basically that's how a tensiometer works. You stick it in the soil dries out, water gets sucked out, it makes a vacuum. You have a gauge on there that reads that vacuum, that tells you what the tension of the soil is. And this guy in Austria, when he made blue mats, was like, wait a moment, let's stick a diaphragm on that, and that's a valve. So basically, as the soil dries out, it pulls a vacuum, that vacuum pulls the diaphragm down, which unpinches the tubing. And that the little brown screw cap that's on top of blue mats is basically you're just tightening it down onto the tubing, so it acts like a gate. It's basically like there's a top and a bottom, and the bottom just coming down and coming up and coming down and coming up and just pinching it and opening it and pinching it and opening it. And so the thing is, blue mats are very sensitive. So you stick it into the soil. The moment it touches the soil, if that soil is dry, that diaphragm starts coming down. And so now when you are trying to set that blue mat, you're no longer setting it against zero or like rest point. It's like tearing, this is another analogy, like it's like tearing a scale and then trying to weigh something on it. So it's like you like put something that's like 2 grams on a scale, and then you weigh, and then you tear it, so it's zero again, and now you're weighing it as if it's zero, but it's not actually zero, it's teared. So when you're setting the blue mat, the diaphragm inside the blue mat comes down, and then when you try to set it, it's no longer set at rest, if that makes sense. So by not having the bottom on the blue mat and just setting everything with just the top on it, with just the top, not connected to anything, you're removing any of the factors that could influence where that ends up, essentially, if that makes sense. And then if we just make the pressure consistent, so we will just have a pressure reducer that just goes straight into a little elbow or a T, so it just dead ends right to the carrot. We'll just sit there with a big pile of blue mat caps, and you just attach it, set it, take it off, attach it, set it, take it off, attach it, set it, take it off. So we can basically assembly line set
because
many of these blue mats.
Because there's a basic process that if people use blue mats or whatever they're familiar with, where you dial it in, so we're it's connected to a pressurized water source. You open up that brown cap until you get water flow, and then you dial it back until you get this hanging drip, and then you go back like 2 more triangles. Yeah. And the hanging drop, is that what you said?
I like the term drop more than drip. I think one of the
things he's trying to do
I think one of the
vocabulary
things
change around
one of the things that's confusing to people is that drip is active, which makes
all right. Yeah.
yeah.
So
you might drop. It like hasn't dropped yet. It's sitting there with the suction.
It's the exact moment where water flow is cut off.
Yeah. So you get the hanging drop. or drip as we've used previously. But and yeah, and that's with no bottom connected to it, right? So that's just to the open atmosphere. And then what you do is you get one of these protective caps we have. They're like a little plastic cap that actually they're made by the Blue Mat factory, and they snap right on top of the dial, so you can't change that dial anymore. So you pop one of those on, and now this cap, it's like this loose, this loose, the top of a Blue Mat. It's got 3mm tubing going through it. It's set like that thing. If at 15 psi, you set this thing at 15 psi, and you do 2 triangles back, you're going to hit right around 100 millibars with that, 80 to 100 millibars, something like that.
Yeah.
So we have a graph
depending on your pressure.
Yeah, and so then you can have a box of those preset caps, right? And all you got to do at that point is soak the bottom of the carrot for 15 minutes. Make sure it's full of water. Take that cap, stick it underwater, and attach it to the carrot bottom. And it takes a relatively time consuming piece out of the install practice of a Blue Mat system, and it cuts that down dramatically. I mean, it's still time consuming, but it's much less, and it also gives you extreme uniformity from carrot to carrot to carrot to carrot. So from container to container to container, and you don't have to guess anymore. You just follow this process, this basic SOP, and it makes having 1,000 carrots in a facility totally doable, and something that we would 100% recommend if they're done in this particular process. And then once you have those sensors set, you can take them out, you can throw in a bucket of water, you can put them back in. They never have to be reset either. So like from round to round to round, when people pull their carrots to like dump soil, till, do whatever they're doing with their soil mix, to re-amend, people tend to pull their irrigation out between those cycles. The carrots just go right back in, ready to rock at that point, as long as they're stored in a bucket of water or something like that.
So rather than the older process was you stick a Blue Mat in and you kind of adjust it to where you want it, and then each cycle you do that, which involves like each time and energy spent kind of like adjusting and finagling things. Now it's basically like you set your sensors one time and they're set forever. And then the beautiful thing that's more or less, they might change over a few years as the plastic and the diaphragm, it tends to dry out a little bit over the course of several years, but for all intents and purposes, it'll be the same cycle to cycle for a long time. And what that's opened up for us is that we can actually preset sensors if we want to for people. Like we can preset them before they even leave.
Yeah. Should we announce this now?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, basically what we could do now.
Big announcement, folks.
Yeah.
For a small fee. Yeah.
Because it has to be done by hand. We can basically preset the Blue Mats before they leave for people. And and with the adjustable pressure reducers, we just tell people like to it at this pressure.
Yeah.
There's a gauge, so we know it's the same. We can set the Blue Mats and we can send them out to people. And then rather than them having to do anything with their Blue Mats, they just come preset. And they just take the bottom, soak it for 15 minutes, put the top on underwater, and stick it in.
Yeah, for about 6 months now, we've picked a handful of pilot projects where we've preset all the carrots here in Boulder, Colorado, dry. Like there's no the bottoms never touch water. We shipped them to Arizona, to California, to New Mexico, to Michigan, wherever they're going. People then soak the bottoms, through the tops in, plug them in, boom, they're off to the races. Like they don't even do any adjustment. So yeah,
I mean, if you're going to adjust,
we have not promoted this at all. We've not even really. This is literally the first time that we've mentioned this. But we're going to start, I think, offering that as a service. If people want to have, they can receive preset carrots here in our shop space. We'll preset all the carrots here at the. We have a R&D workshop here where we test stuff out, and we'll do all that here. They'll be preset. They'll be capped, and really, people all we'll need to do is soak the bottom, screw them on, put them in the soil, and they're going to hit your target moisture levels.
Yeah.
So I've got a
And then-
couple stupid questions too. When we go ahead, Izzy, if you're.
Oh, I was gonna say, when you adjust the blue mats at that point, if you want to adjust your blue mats, you can just adjust them either by hand or with the reducer. So if you want, you can plug them all in. You have 100 carats controlling all your pots, and then they're already preset. And now if you want to adjust them, you don't even really have to touch the carats in the same way you used to.
Stupid questions. Let them roll.
Okay, so when I'm using, this is probably because of my own failures. Okay, this is probably my inducing. It's probably my fault. So we're gonna get down to the bottom of that. So, or lack of knowledge. Let's say that it's going to be lack of knowledge. So when I'm using your guys' moisture meters in my soil, I'm thinking it's because it's getting too dry too fast. And the moisture meter, I would go back and I would look at it, maybe pull it up out of the soil just to check it, and it would be losing some water in there. And I'm guessing that's because it's not getting rehydrated because my soil is just too dry. And I've always had that problem with just dry hydrophobic soil. It's been difficult to keep my soil wet at some points. Once I get it wet, then it's good to stay like that. But is that a common thing you're seeing when somebody's soil is too dry, that it's just depleting the water out of the carrot?
If your soil is dry enough to becoming hydrophobic, sure, it'll pull water out of that meter. I mean, think about it. It's just a ceramic cone that's like that has some permeability. So as you can dry it out. That's so again, if you're getting to a point of like hydrophobic dryness, it's probably just basically evaporating through the tip at that point.
That has to be what's happening if I'm losing water out of the column. That has to be the end result, right?
Yeah.
Well, the other is there's a crack in here somewhere, which I mean, we've sold like thousands and thousands of these, and I've probably seen that like
Handful of times.
I don't know, like 10 or
Yeah,
15
if you've
times or
ever
something,
dropped a
but
thing on a concrete floor and there's a crack in it, I mean that could be a thing. But it has to be pretty dry for water to get fully sucked out of it like that. And we're talking like really dry.
no, like
So
fully hydrophobic.
yeah, so fully hydrophobic. So
Yeah.
one of the biggest things where I see people do that is they let their soil dry out in between cycles. And this is a bigger thing with peat because cocoa can be re-wetted very easily. So if you're using cocoa, it's not really a
peat's a real-
problem. But peat, if it goes hydrophobic, can get really difficult to rehydrate. And so what I'll see people do is the most common time I'll see it is they don't have any plants in and they leave it for like all of winter, or they leave it, for like 2 weeks until the next plants go in or whatever. And in that time, it gets super dry. And the problem with peat, this is another really important thing for blue mats, is like consistent starting moisture. Peat, when it gets dry, you might be able to re-wet it, but you have like weird dry pockets like throughout the thing because the whole thing doesn't want to re-wet itself. And then also you can I mean, everyone's done this where you pour a bunch of water on your plants. Like that's like 5 gallons. Then you literally move the top of the soil and it's like a 1/4 inch down. It's like literally like dust. So I think that like not letting your soil go hydrophobic is probably the best way to combat that. And getting your soil moist again can be pretty tough. I think the best way I found to do it is physically mixing it, which obviously in a no-till situation you probably don't want to do. But like pouring in water and like shoveling and mixing it as you're watering it will work, or using a surfactant agent.
But you don't want to do too much of that because then it could keep the soil for too wet afterwards. Like there's a good balancing factor there. You don't want to
definitely
do one thing.
But I think Izzy's point is some folks might forget to keep watering their soil between cycles, right? So is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, like if you're having a rest period in between a living soil cycle, if the whole idea of like living soil is you want to keep it alive. So the point is you would like to keep it moist.
You should be inoculating. You should be, making sure you have a mulch layer. You should be doing some root drenching.
Keep your irrigation on.
Yeah, keep your irrigation on. Just keep the thing rolling and keep things, because blue mats don't, they're not going to hit runoff.
That's the thing. Yeah, if you have a blue mat system, it's just going to water a small amount during that time. They're not going to overwater, but any irrigation. I mean, you just want to keep watering your soil in between.
Yeah,
between cycles, or if your pots are sitting outside, like a lot of people that do outdoor.
Yeah.
Their pots might sit outdoors over the winter, and that's an opportunity for things to dry out too much if you don't get a lot of precipitation.
Okay, so I want to spend, let's say, the last 5-10 minutes here of like, let's say you're a grassroots customer, you got a bunch of 3x3 beds set up in a room. Now we're going to do a full blue mat switch over to this room. What would be one bed at a time? This just our first bed, you know, from beginning to end, what are we going to set up and what are we going to do? And I'm guessing the first step is going to be making sure that you've got the consistent moisture and the optimum moisture level before you set up the system.
Well, it doesn't have to be optimum. It just has to be wet. You need to make sure that it is evenly moist to begin with so that it stays even from then on. Because if you have dry pockets throughout your soil and they're hydrophobic, which means they don't want to get wet again, if you stick a sensor, any sensor, regardless if it's a blue mat or not, into a dry pocket, it's going to read dry. And if you stick it into a wet pocket, it's going to read wet. So you want a consistent starting moisture that ideally is pretty wet. It does not have to be the exact moisture content that you're going to end up at. You don't have to like, oh, I'm shooting for 50 millibars. The soil has to be 50 millibars for the sensor to go in. You just want it to be very thoroughly watered and have it be very consistently watered, which I think would be the case for basically any facility anywhere or home grow.
Yeah. So that's like your basic starting point. And then as far as the components that go in the bed, especially if you're doing like multiple of these, we're talking, 10 or more or something like that. Like I would just go honestly with one maxi carrot, which is the 9-inch, that's the longer one per bed, connected to one of our manifold systems. So on a 3x3, it would be 3
or 4
3-foot lengths of blue soak. That's our soaker hose, our Tyvek based soaker hose, and with a little manifold on either end. So yeah, the maxi manifold, the 4x4, like we have a kit called a 4x4 maxi manifold.
Yeah, it works great for 3x3s or 4x4s,
yeah.
but that we really like manifolds for the consistency's sake, because and what a manifold looks like essentially, just if you visualizing it, is you've got 4 straight lines of soaker hose that are running across the bed, and then they're all connected at both sides. So what that does is it means we know exactly where the water is coming out, and it's all very even and geometric. Whereas if you're doing a spiral, we used to do a lot of those. The reason why we don't do it anymore, it's not because it doesn't work. It works fine. It's just, it's hard to do many of them and ensure that they're all laid out the same way. But if we're doing 4-foot lengths of like at a 4x4 bed, we have 4-4-foot lengths of soaker hose, and they're each have 6 inches in between each of those lines. It just allows us to know exactly where things are placed. And so then with the blue mat, we do them all exactly 1 foot inside the manifold and 3 inches away from to the left of the soaker hose. It just allows us to create that consistency in the placement of everything.
Beautiful. That's great.
So basically you'd have that per bed, and then you would have a supply line that somehow ran to each bed, past each bed, and it would in your main water source would tap into that. And that supply line would run back to some sort of pressurized water source, either a pump kit or just a hose bib with a pressure reducer on it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And then it's no problem when you come through once a week. Obviously, it's the stupidest question. I'm answering it as I'm saying it, but you come through once a week with a 50-gallon drum, sub pump, and garden hose to do your feeding or your compost tea or whatever it is. You drench that whole bed. Is it okay to drench that carrot too? You're just soaking the whole thing, not paying attention. You're just watering everything, or is there certain SOPs we need to follow?
That's a very common SOP. The main thing, you would want to try to water that in evenly, but for the most part, yeah, it's very common SOP is to just run clean water through the blue mat system. And then if you want to do a liquid input or top dressing, a liquid top dressing, then you just go ahead and do that. It brings the moisture level a little bit higher than you have it set at, and the blue mats just turn off until the moisture level drives back down. But realistically, like if you're feeding a 3x3 bed, like you're putting a few gallons of water in there.
Yeah, probably 5 gallons, 3 to 5 gallons.
Yeah, which like within a day you're back down to your target level.
Yeah,
So
the blue mats don't care why it's wet. They're just set to a moisture content. I mean, that's the thing, is it's not, it's like it's a sensor, but it's a physical thing that's happening. This is all just like simple water physics. So if it's wetter, there's nothing that's going to make the thing open. If it's drier, it will. So if it dries out because the plant is drinking the water, or because it's really hot out and it's just evaporating, it's going to water all the same. If it's wet because the water came through the blue mat, or because you put the water down, it's also all the same. So you can definitely water on top of blue mats, and you can totally put nutrients through blue mats. We just want clean nutrients. So you could do like, there's certain organic nutrients you can do. You can definitely run clean salts and things like that. But when we're talking biologics, like compost teas, ferments, things like that, we recommend hand watering them, just because you don't want to clog the system up.
plus anything that's going to like, become biologically
proliferate in there.
Yeah, like I mean, we
That's the
love
good word.
Organics Alive. Those guys are awesome, super great product. We've had trouble running those products through our blue mats because they're so alive. Like, and our tanks don't water right away. Like if we mix up a mixing tank and run it through the blue mats, it might take a day to run through, and in that time, like enough chemical processes have occurred in that reservoir.
It's a tribute to the name of their product. It's alive. It's going to be.
It's alive.
and
It really is.
great,
I mean, it's awesome. I just watered my whole outdoor thing with Organics Alive the other day, but I did it as a top dress. I mixed it up in buckets, and I like just top dressed in on top of my 65-gallon grassroots pots. You know,
Yeah, going back and doing a root drench. Honestly, it's like for me and my grow, I only see my grow once a week, sometimes twice a week. I'm not there at the place. I have to go travel and see it. And to just sit there and do a root drench for every plant and take the time to look at every plant and give it that time, that love. It's the shade of a farmer over the plant. You know what I mean? It's not much to ask, because you're implementing so many techniques in your garden to not be there. You know what I mean? To be able to not be there. That's the glory of your guys' things is we can set up this bed that maintains moisture, set up a system that helps us maintain the moisture, and then be able to walk away from it and go and enjoy a weekend with your family.
Oh yeah, that's why I love blue mats. I have walked away from my grow so much. This summer I drove to
Alaska. Awesome social media, man. We get to follow you all over the United States, and you're still at home.
Yeah, it's awesome. I just drove.
Izzy, busy Izzy,
busy_Izzy. Yeah, I drove to Alaska recently, and then after that, I was on a trip to Ohio, and I was on a trip into Los Angeles. Like I was literally gone for like 2/3 of flower, of like the entire flowering cycle. And I just pulled down, and it was fantastic. It was like one of the best runs I've ever done. And that's awesome. I mean, I literally found blue mats long before I worked here, because my girlfriend was like, I am not going to stick around if you keep running around watering all these plants and blowing me off all the time. And I was like, I need to figure something out so that I don't have to constantly run around and water all my plants all the time. Yeah. And it did it for me. And that's why I originally found them and reached out to them, because I was like, it allowed me to grow a big garden.
Yeah, I mean, that's funny. Yeah, as cliche as it is.
Yeah,
I've like literally had multiple people on the phone be like, "Man, you saved my marriage. Like, now I can take my wife on a vacation. I'm in the basement watering everything." So, no, that aspect of like vacation watering, automatic watering, it's real and it works, and it just adds a ton of time, and on a commercial scale,
the labor savings is uncalculable.
Yeah, and just the targeted moisture content. I mean, I have never, and I've been around a lot of sensory systems, I have never found a system that can do the level of exact moisture content pot to pot in the way that we're doing it, to be honest. I mean, it's just very difficult to do.
Because per sensor, the cost is extremely low compared to another for anything that's like anywhere close to that accurate.
Well, the infrastructure that has to go in just to support that.
Exactly. The whole control system as well. But like if you're doing, any kind of digital sensor,
it's like $200 usually.
Per pot. We're talking like $8 per pot or something like that. And so you're going, container to container, and
and they're reliable. There's a lot of cheap sensors out there, but to be honest, a lot of them are unreliable. I'm not going to say any names or say any particular company, because I'm sure there are some out there that probably are reliable, but we've not been able to find cheap, consistent electronic sensors. I think the beauty of a blue mat is that you can actually trust it. Like I know a lot of people are like, yeah, I have these sensors in there and they tell me things and I can't like really trust it. I still kind of use my own intuition. And I have the intuition because I've grown for a long time and hand watered a lot, but I trust the blue mats fully. And that's a difficult thing to do, with a lot of sensors.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we hit some awesome points here, guys. At the end of the podcast, I always take a second and say and ask, is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you guys had floating around in the back of your mind that's very important? So just want to say.
I think covered all the stuff that I was talking.
Yeah. I mean, just that it's a job. Like this is a job, right? Like I'm sitting here, we're working, you're working right now, Tyler. Everybody's working. We're doing our jobs in life, and like they're stressful and they're tough. But there is I do feel grateful like to be in this position and to do the work we do, because I think even though there's a lot of grind to it, the stuff we get to do is really exciting and fun. On many, many levels, and getting to push the envelope in the way that we do, look for new things, look for technologies that, could be applied to other aspects of agriculture, not just cannabis, because we didn't get into that at all, but we also do that too. We work on, fairly large scale regenerative farming projects and large scale kind of permaculture installations, more locally here in Colorado, but we have hundreds and hundreds of acres of under cultivation that have irrigation systems that we've designed and implemented, that are really doing some interesting things and creating tremendous water savings. So, just wanting to kind of acknowledge to anybody that's out there in this industry that's working on the side of sustainability, conservation, I appreciate you. I appreciate you guys. And, I also know everybody's out there trying to make ends meet and have a healthy livelihood. And I appreciate that too. So just, kind of acknowledging that a lot of us are in the same place. And, I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be here with you, Tyler, kind of on this journey that we've been on for several years together in a way. And it's a wild world, and here we are.
Yeah,
Definitely something to be grateful for.
Yeah.
One thing to add on, if you have any questions about anything, please call us. We're actually around. Like we sit in the office and we design systems all day, and that's what we do.
We're sitting in my office right now.
I think a lot of people will call us and be like,
Yeah.
man, I wish I would have called you a year ago. And I'm like, yeah, we could have, we can basically.
Yeah, I mean, literally, we're in my office. Cooper's is in the next office over, fielding phone calls while we're doing this podcast right now.
So we're here to. I think one of the best things about us is we offer really good technical support, and we're all growers. Like we all grow too. So we all know the ins and outs and the trials and tribulations of growing. So if you guys have any questions or anything that ever concerns, we always just push, please reach out.
Yeah, give us a call.
Yeah.
Last final thing is real quickly for each of you guys, can you suggest a grower and a company that we should have on the podcast this season?
A grower,
a farm, a grower.
Yeah. You should have Matt LaPlante come on.
Oh yeah, Matt.
That dude is really extremely knowledgeable and intelligent. I feel like sometimes I'm like, I feel like I know a lot of things, and being around him, I'm like, no, I don't. He knows so much.
What is he? On Instagram, Rhizo VT. He's up in Vermont now. Rhizo VT. And what was the name of that farm that he had?
It's a project in Vermont.
Yeah. Anyways, he did a big cannabis farm in Vermont this year. That's where his wife's from originally, so they've been there for a bunch of years. He was in Oregon before there, and he was Oricron on Instagram. I don't know, you can find him out. But he's kind of soil consultant. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. I think I know a lot. And you listen to him or talk to him, and you're like, whoa.
It's good to surround yourself with people who are.
That's been my whole game plan in life, is just surround myself with people that are smarter than me.
that are awesome. And the whole thing is, it's like, well, if you've been doing something for 7 years and someone else has been doing something for 10 years and you keep doing it, it doesn't matter, because later you've been doing it for 17 and they've been doing it for 20.
You
So
guys just
everyone's
exposed the
always-
whole reason why I hang out with you. So
Yeah.
So yeah, Matt LaPlante. I'll give him a call. Yeah.
anybody else?
Honestly, the easy as the Matt Barnes down in Australia, I think is really cool,
Yeah, you should
because
get him on for sure.
it's such an interesting thing down there. They've got like importation stuff, like cannabis coming down from Canada. They're dealing with corporatization in a way that we're not, because it's still state to state. And it's just a really interesting environment. He's basically single-handedly bringing living soil
Yeah,
to
he really is.
Australia.
Yeah.
And I think, like, particularly in the living soil world, it's really interesting.
He's really
dynamic
communicative too. Like, I'm on WhatsApp with him like fairly often and stuff. So yeah, he's great. I mean, there's lots and lots of great, people that
I know it's hard to pick one.
I know. But
have to have you guys write me a list ahead of time.
yeah,
We could
yeah,
definitely do that.
yeah.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you lending your time, taking time out of your day to come on here and share your guys' clearly just tremendous wealth of knowledge. And, we're just people in this industry wanting to see other people be successful with things that we're very passionate about. So that's why we're so open to give you all the amount of knowledge that we have and coming out of our spewing out of our sometimes crazy mouths, that we just want you to be successful. Your guys' success is our success to go off of. So we honestly really respect people who actually physically apply this information and take it to a whole nother level and make us challenge our thinking as far as improving things. So thank you for everybody's time and listening to this. And thank you for investing in the Grassroots Living Soil podcast, season 2, episode 1. And it was badass. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, man.